All right, guys, we're going to try this again. I'm so sorry that the sound wasn't working. Next time, guys, you got to let me know. You can't just gripe about it to each other, right? Sorry that chapter 5 wasn't there and working, but we've taken the quiz on that, so rather than redo that one, I'm going to jump into chapter 6. Hopefully I'll get these all done today and up so that you can review them for the quiz on Friday. But I think when I was trying to make all of this screencasting work with Zoom, I may have messed up some things with my microphone. But here we are, chapter 6. So I'm going to try and go through this pretty quickly. I've already highlighted it because I did that last night while I was making this video. So here we go. We have in chapter 5, obviously, Nick has kind of helped to facilitate Gatsby and Daisy getting back together. And we had that whole moment with the shirts and all of these things. But in chapter 6, we're going to find out a lot more about Gatsby, right? So he became very popular, very famous. People know about him. They want to know, what is so important about him. He's short of being news, it says. And then we find out that his real name is James Gatz. I'm going to use a different color for this since I've already gone through that. And we hear that we get the story of Dan Cody and it really kind of where he came from. So it turns out his parents are, it says, shiftless and unsuccessful farm people, right? But in his imagination, he was a much bigger deal than that. And so he never really accepted his parents. And this is really interesting. We have a lot of allusion to biblical language here, almost calling Gatsby a messianic figure because he's a son of God. And also he's about his father's business, very much talking in messianic biblical terms here. But the idea is, and Nick suggests as the narrator, that maybe Gatsby started putting together this persona as Jay Gatsby long before this time actually even took place. So he goes up to Lake Superior. He was working as a job at St. Olaf in Minnesota. Felt like maybe this wasn't the thing for him. His drums of destiny were moving him forward, and this janitor's work was just not what was for him. So while he was, up at Lake Superior is when Dan Cody's yacht dropped anchor, and he was able to do him a favor and become endeared to him. Let's see. Then we come in and, the fishy end of Dan Cody, right? So he drinks so much. For Dan Cody sober knew what lavish doings Dan Cody might be soon about, and he provided for such contingencies by reposing more and more trust in Gatsby. But it lasted 5 years. It might have lasted indefinitely, except for the fact that Ella Kay came aboard one night in Boston, and a week later Dan Cody inhospitably died. Fishy death. But it was greatly due to Dan Cody that Gatsby didn't really drink a whole lot because he'd seen what had happened. Also, we find out that indeed Dan Cody did leave him money. He didn't get it though because everything went to Ella Kay. She kind of took care of all of that. Which means that in a way he wasn't lying when he talked about, coming into some money, his family died, but then he lost it, right? So that wasn't totally a made up story. Anyway, so then we have this awkward interaction between Tom and he's got this friend Sloane, and we've got Gatsby. So Tom Buchanan comes in for a drink. He's at Gatsby's, and then he kind of comes along, and Gatsby is invited, but they're kind of like not wanting him there, but he comes anyway. We have this super awkward interchange where Tom's like, doesn't he know we don't want him? But he also invites them to come to one of his parties. It's really important to him that Daisy comes to see one of these parties, and he really kind of wants to show off in front of Tom as well. So eventually they do. They come, and I love this. Tom was evidently perturbed at Daisy's running around alone for the following Saturday night. He came with her to Gatsby's party. let's see, there were the same people, or at least the same sort of people, and the same profusion of champagne, the same many-colored, many-keyed commotion, but I felt an unpleasantness in the air, a pervading harshness that hadn't been there before. Or perhaps I had merely grown used to it, grown to accept West Egg as a world complete in itself, with its own standards, its own great figures, second to nothing because it had no consciousness of being so. And now I was looking at it again through Daisy's eyes, which Gatsby's going to be doing that as well. And he's going to be unsatisfied with the way that this situation has gone. Anyway, we have an opportunity for Daisy and Gatsby to be alone together. And the first inkling that Tom has that there's something going on, right? But also, Daisy's really not that impressed with this party, or at least doesn't put on the air that she is. And then we get this Tom, being like, who is he? Some big bootlegger? He goes, I imagined it. But knows, again, Nick's still defending him, no, not Gatsby, he wouldn't be. Well, he certainly must have strained himself to get this menagerie together. So again, that idea that this is all a show, and so forth. Let's see. And then the party ends, and again, Gatsby's seeing things through Daisy's eyes. She didn't like it, he said immediately. I feel far from her. It's hard to make her understand. And we talked a little bit about this in our discussion the other day, right here. But there's this idea that he wants to erase the past 5 years, right? And this is really key, and you can see that I did some serious highlighting of this when I went through it before, but this is important. He says he wanted nothing less of Daisy than that she should go to Tom and say, I never loved you. After she had obliterated 3 years with that sentence, they could decide upon a more practical measures to be taken. One of them was that after she was free, they were to go back to Louisville and be married from her home, from her house, just as if it were 5 years ago. So almost going back in time, right? And she doesn't understand, he said despairingly. She used to be able to understand. We'd sit for hours. And now this is really key, because this is that part where Nick says, I wouldn't ask too much of her. You can't repeat the past. Can't repeat the past. Why, of course you can. And he has this idea that, he can do this, and it ends up being probably a large downfall. And then we get a little bit of a backstory. Some of the Gatsby, remember, was kind of a womanizer. Before, he'd known a lot of different women, it says. But here we find out that he knew that Daisy was going to be the girl for him, and that when he kissed this girl and forever wed his unutterable visions to her perishable breath, his mind would never romp again like the mind of God. So he waited, listening for a moment longer, then tuning fork that had been struck upon a star. Then he kissed her. And it was a big deal. It was essentially the making of Gatsby's future focus. Through all he said, even through his appalling sentimentality, I was reminded of something, an elusive rhythm, a fragment of lost words that I had heard somewhere a long time ago. For a moment, a phrase tried to take shape in my mouth, and my lips parted like a dumb man's, as though there was more struggling upon them than a wisp of startled air. But they made no sound, and what I had almost remembered was uncommunicable forever. So the key here is Gatsby and Daisy are together, right? And this idea of repeating the past and even erasing those years, and if that's even a possibility.